forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord, and shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. Then we're skipping over a lot of them as we go along. I'm just turning to them as I see them. Chapter 42 and verse 1. Behold my servant whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my Spirit upon him, and he shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. Verse 6, I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, and for a light of the Gentiles. Then, of course, over in chapter 53, a messianic prophecy. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of pains, acquainted with sickness, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Chapter 61 and verse 1, a text that he applies to himself in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, and to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called the trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. So there are some of the messianic references in Isaiah. Isaiah's book, according to chapter 1 and some inductive reasoning, covers a period of 5 of the kings of Judah, 4 of which have their names preserved in the first verse of Isaiah's book. Isaiah 1:1, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, his first cousin, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Now we only have 4 mentioned there. He's setting, you see, some of the prophets don't do this. Ones like Obadiah and Joel, they're kind of hard to date because they don't set the time scene as specifically as Isaiah does, where he said, I prophesied in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So we know around when he was. Now, if he prophesied, now he's got these kings in chronological order. Uzziah, his son Jotham, his son Ahaz, his son Hezekiah. When during the reign of Uzziah did he prophesy? Well, he tells us that in chapter 6 and verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, then I saw the Lord sitting upon his throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled all the temple. So he dates his ministry, the beginning of his ministry, at the end of the reign of King Uzziah, which you got on your chart correctly as 739 BC. Now, he doesn't prophesy during very much of the reign of Uzziah, because he tells us Uzziah just died here. So he does include Uzziah. Notice he goes through Jotham, through Ahaz, and through Hezekiah, along with his co-regency with Manasseh, his son. You have to follow this on your chart because we're going to change something on there. Notice that on your chart, of all the prophets, I think this is one of only two that I remember that he has ended their ministry with a question mark. In other words, he's not for sure if that's where their ministry ended. And that's good that he got a question mark there, because that is not when Isaiah's ministry ended. He's got it ending what? About 691, 92? Somewhere along there. How can we prove that it goes further? We'll turn over to Isaiah 37, 37, and 38. I'll show you how we know it has to go beyond this time. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed. This is when he failed to take Jerusalem in 701 like he wanted to do. By the way, go back to your chart. I guess maybe you don't know what's going on, but he just attempted to take Jerusalem, and he has over 180,000 of his forces slain by the Lord at this time. I'm talking about Sennacherib, and as a result, he departs from Jerusalem and goes back to his home. Now, the battle, it was a battle, it's just that the Lord won, and Judah didn't have to fight, took place, and you can see this on your chart, 701. Sennacherib invades Judah. This is during the reign of Hezekiah as king. 701, Sennacherib invades Judah. So, in other words, Isaiah 37:36, we can date that as 701. Along with verse 37. If Sennacherib's leaving, he left the same year. He didn't stay there 5 years or something. He left the same year. But there's going to be a big time gap when we get down through the last verse that you would never know. It appears like he left and went back home and got murdered when he got back home. But he left, went back home, stayed there 20 years, and then got murdered by his two sons. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh, 701. And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, smote him with the sword. And they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. That took place in 681. So verse 38 comes 20 years after verse 37. Now notice this is all in Isaiah's prophecy. And Isaiah records in verse 38 both the death of Sennacherib and the ascension to the throne of his son Esarhaddon. Now go back to your chart. Look where he ended him. Isaiah 6:91-92. That is before Sennacherib dies in 681. Therefore, how could Isaiah have known that he died and known that his son Esarhaddon reigned in his stead? You see? So we have to carry Isaiah's ministry down at least to the year 681 BC. If he went any after that, we don't know. But this is the last datable historical reference in the book of Isaiah, is the death of Sennacherib and the coming to the throne of his son Esarhaddon. And he died, Sennacherib died, Esarhaddon came to the throne in 681. So we have to take Isaiah's ministry down at least that far. Perhaps further, if so, we don't know. So there is one thing that needs to be changed on the chart. The question mark was right. He had a question. We have a question, but now we've got it answered. We extend it down about 10 more years. So we add about 10 more years onto his ministry. Don't want to cut Isaiah short on his ministry here. Okay, I've already mentioned, as the first verse does, his prophecy is directed primarily to Judah and Jerusalem. Remember, there are only a couple of prophets that are prophesying towards Israel. Most of the ones, if they're not toward Israel, most of the ones are not towards foreign nations like Obadiah or Jonah or Nahum. Most of them are directed towards Judah. And Isaiah is not an exception. In the first verse of his book, he said, "This is the vision that I have received concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and we know Manasseh." Because this takes us, see on your chart, that takes you way down into the reign of Manasseh by himself in 681. But remember, he couldn't get to the court during this time on pain of death. So that's why he doesn't include old wicked Manasseh's name in the subscription of the book. So we date his ministry 739. We end it at least at 681, which gives him a ministry of around 60 years, which is one of the longest of the latter prophets. He was a contemporary with Hosea, who was elder, and Micah, who was younger. Hosea 760 and Micah 735. Both of these are on your chart. Isaiah was a contemporary with Hosea and with Micah. And of course, the classic passage that shows us the relationship between Isaiah and Micah is found earlier in Isaiah chapter 2 and Micah chapter 4. The first few verses of both of these chapters are almost word for word. It's a prophecy, of course, of the millennium. The Lord gave someone a song, a brother a song here, right on time. For Isaiah, because this is the passage we were going to look at that shows their contemporaries. Isaiah 2:2. "It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war any more." Now turn over to Micah chapter 4. Micah 4:1, "But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth out of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore." Almost word for word between these two men, because they were contemporaries of one another. An outline for the book goes like this. We've got two divisions. The first division, chapters 1 through 39, are prophecies of judgment, for the most part. Prophecies of judgment. And we break this section down into 5 subdivisions. Of course, we could go into much, much more detail of outlining the book. We're just giving a cursory look, a general look. First division of that section is chapters 1 through 12, which are prophecies concerning Judah and Jerusalem. You see, you can even break that down further. Like I've said, chapters 7 through 12 are the Emmanuel chapters. Chapters 1 through 6 are introductory. So you could break that down, but we're not going to. 1 through 12, prophecies against Judah and Jerusalem. 13 through 23 are prophecies against the nations. And I'll show you what I mean by that. They're called burdens. Turn over to chapter 13. Prophecies against the Gentile nations. There's just a whole list of them, one chapter after another. The burden of such and such which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. Starts off chapter 13 and verse 1, the burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. That's, of course, chapter 13, chapter 14. Chapter 15, the burden of Moab. You can just follow along and notice these. Chapter 17, 1, the burden of Damascus. Chapter 18, woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes upon the waters. 19:1, the burden of Egypt. 21 verse 1, the burden of the desert of the sea. 21:11, the burden of Duma. 21:13, the burden of Arabia. 22 verse 1, the burden of the valley of vision. So you don't even know what he's talking about there, probably. Isaiah 23 in verse 1. This is the last chapter in this second subdivision, the burden of Tyre. So you see those chapters, 13 through 23. And let me just mention this ahead of time. You'll see this in all of your other major prophets also. They have specific sections that are devoted to burdens or to prophecies against Gentile nations. And they generally come right in line with each other, and they just hit these Gentile nations one in a row and give some prophecies, some of them fulfilled, some of them not fulfilled, about these countries. As a matter of fact, I guess one of the most interesting in Isaiah is back in chapter 19. Of course, chapter 19 now of Isaiah is the burden of Egypt. Now, look at some of these very interesting, difficult verses to understand. Isaiah 19 and verse, let's see where to start. Verse 18. In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Lord of hosts, and one shall be called, one of these 5 cities, the city of destruction. In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt. Verse 20. Well, let's go on and read that. And a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt, for they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior and a great one, and he shall deliver them. And the Lord shall be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know the Lord in that day, and shall do sacrifice and oblation. Verse 23. In that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria. Verse 25. Even a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of mine hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. It's gotten pretty quiet. I wonder what those verses are talking about, and when. It keeps saying, in that day. When has there ever been a day that Israel sacrificed unto the Lord and spoke the Hebrew tongue rather than the Coptic or the Egyptian tongue? Well, we'll go on. Third subdivision, chapters 24 through 27, which is known as Isaiah's little apocalypse. Chapters 28 through 35. This is the section where we have prophecies against Samaria and Israel. Then finally, chapters 36 through 39 is a historical transition which concerns King Hezekiah. Then we come to the second division of the book, chapters 40 through 66, which are prophecies of consolation and hope. The first half of the book doesn't have just a whole lot of hope in it. You see some hope, but not nearly as much as you find in chapters 40 through 66. Prophecies of consolation and hope. That's why he starts it off, comfort ye, my people, saith your God. We've got three subdivisions here. Chapters 40 through 48, the restoration of the exiles. Chapters 49 through 57, salvation through the future Messiah. Then 58 through the end of the book, the future glory of Israel. And by Israel, I mean Israel and Judah, the whole nation. The future glory of Israel and the glory of the whole earth. New heavens and new earth, that is. Now at the end of chapter 48, if you'll look there, and the end of chapter 57, we have the exact same phrase. So we know this is where Isaiah is making a division. Isaiah 48, this is the end of the first subdivision of Isaiah's second portion of his book. In verse 22, there is no peace, saith the Lord, unto the wicked. The last verse of Isaiah 48. Then the last verse of Isaiah 57, there is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. So that's where he's putting a division. Although it all goes together, 40 through 66 all goes together, he's putting a division between these subdivisions that we've looked at, 40 through 48, 49 through 57, 57 through 66. Now that leaves us only one thing to look at this evening, and that is the historical background. There are three great historical events that you need to know something about so that you'll understand Isaiah, because he's prophesying against this background. Three historical events with respect to Israel and Judah take place sometime during Isaiah's call and during Isaiah's ministry that he's prophesying against, that is, against that historical background. The first of these is one of the most important. It begins the Emmanuel section, which is what chapter? 7. Good. I've said it enough. You ought to remember it. 7 through 12, the Emmanuel section. Go back to Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 1. This is the first, and I don't think it's on your chart, and it should have been, because this was a very important occurrence. It's known as the Syro-Ephraimitic War in 734 B.C. Nope, it's not on there. I've got mine drawn on. But in 734, the Syro-Ephraimitic War, which is what Isaiah 7, 8, 9, and so forth are all about, especially in chapter 7. Now, Syro-Ephraimitic, Syro, S-Y-R-O, Ephraimitic, E-P-H-R-A-I-M-I-T-I-C. In other words, the Syrians are the Arameans in Israel. Just like you'd say Medo-Persia, you mean the Medes and the Persians. The Syro-Ephraimitic coalition and Syro-Ephraimitic war was the alliance that was drawn between Damascus and Samaria, or between the Syrians and Israel, or between the Arameans and Israel. So you should have that drawn on there, and that would, of course, come towards the beginning of Isaiah's ministry. He starts in 739. 5 years later, in 734, we have a very important war, the Syro-Ephraimitic War, which takes place here in chapter 7, or at least referred to in chapter 7. So we can date chapter 7. Not all of his prophecies now go in chronological order from one chapter to another, but we know the date of chapter 7 is 734 B.C. Now what we have taking place here is the king of Damascus, the king of the Arameans, whose name is Rezin at this time, has joined up with Pekah, who is king in Israel. Now, Assyria at this time, under Shalmaneser, or first Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, of course Sargon is still in the future, but Assyria under these great leaders and generals has become a very, very strong power, and she's begun to turn her eyes westward at the lands of Syria and Israel and Palestine, and she's planning on attacking. So as a result of that, the king in Damascus, Rezin, and the king in Israel, Pekah, have joined together in an alliance, and they have asked Ahaz, who is king in Judah, to join with them to form the Triple Alliance. You'd be forming a triple alliance here between Damascus, Israel, and Judah. Now, Ahaz refuses to join in with Israel and with Damascus. And as a result, Israel and Damascus decide to attack Judah. And that's what Ahaz is terrified about. That's what Isaiah is prophesying to him about in chapter 7 by telling him it's better to put your trust in the Lord rather than put your confidence in man, because he's going to go and call someone else to help him. Now with that in mind, Isaiah 7:1, it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up or down toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told the house of David, in other words, told Ahaz, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. That's where we get the name, the Syro-Ephraimitic War. And his heart was moved in the heart of his people as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. And he becomes terrified over this. Now, we already read verse 4. God has told him, don't be afraid. Verse 7, thus saith the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. He's saying they're not going to be able to take it if you'll trust in me. Now, you can probably already guess ahead of time, wicked Ahaz selects not to trust in the Lord. Who does he decide to trust in? Well, go over to 2 Kings. Let's see, we got several passages. 2 Kings 16 to begin with. Who does he trust in? Assyria is the one fixing to attack him. So he pulls a very good diplomatic move, and he goes to Assyria and talks to Tiglath-Pileser and says, won't you come and help me fight against Israel and fight against Damascus? Remember, this is 734. And so it's his coalition with Assyria telling Assyria, come and help me fight against them, that eventually draws, even though they were coming anyway, but eventually draws Assyria to Israel and destroys Israel in 722 B.C. This is going to take place 12 years later. But it begins, of all things, with the coalition between Ahaz and Tiglath-Pileser III. He has gone over there and asked for the help in spite or in front of the trouble that he is confronting now. And of course, he agrees to pay a great sum, or ransom sum more or less, for himself and for his people, if Tiglath-Pileser will come and help him. Verse 7 of 2 Kings 16. So Ahaz sent messengers. Now you have to read this after you've read Isaiah 7, 1 through 2. To Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria, and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. And so Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus, and took it, and carried the people of it captive to Kir, and slew Rezin. So he comes first of all and attacks Damascus. It's not until a little bit later that he finally comes and makes a first attempt and a first attack upon Israel, which we see back in chapter 15 and verse 28. And he did that which was evil, this is Pekah, in the sight of the Lord, and departed not from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. And in the days of Pekah, so really this comes after the passage we just read there in chapter 16, Assyria attacks Damascus first and then Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon and Abel-Maachah and Genoa and Kedesh and Hazor and Gilead and Galilee and all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. Now this is in 2 Kings 15, 28 and 29. Now that's not the final fall of Israel and Samaria. That's just the taking of the northern portion of Israel. And he's going to come back later and take the rest. So that is the first of the historical events behind Isaiah and his book, the Syro-Ephraimitic War, 734. The second event is the fall of Israel and Samaria in 722. BC. And the third event, which is described in much detail in chapters 36 through 39, not really the whole text there, but all that concerns Hezekiah, so it all goes together. And that is Sennacherib's invasion of Judah in 701. And remember, he is unsuccessful in his invasion of Judah in 701. So those are the three historical events that are behind Isaiah's prophecy. Now, do you have any questions on that? I know we covered a lot of material there. If something's not clear now, I'll be glad to repeat it. Yes. Let's see. The outline of 5 parts under chapters 1 through 39. The heading of that is prophecies of judgment against Judah and Jerusalem, you could add. Chapters 1 through 39 are prophecies of judgment. 40 through 66 are consolation and hope. (734) Syro-Ephraimitic War. Pardon? Oh, we don't really know exactly how long it lasted. You see, you've got 12 years later, 722, when Israel finally falls there. It doesn't last for that long. Because, you see, he's going to send for help in Assyria, and they're going to come right over and defeat Damascus right away, and that ends Syro-Ephraimitic War right away. Don't think of, when you call a war Syro-Ephraimitic, that it's, that those that represent the two opposing forces. It's the same as the French and Indian War. The French and Indians fought on the same side. And most people, you say a war, the French and Indian War, you think, well, the French fought against the Indians. No, they didn't either. They were fighting against us, the French, but they got the Indians to help them. So the French and Indian War and the Syro-Ephraimitic War are parallel in that sense. They've got two names of people on the same side in the name of the war. You don't even know who they're fighting against. I don't even tell you that in the name. The second one on historical background, the second event, was the fall of Israel and Samaria. 722, the fall of Israel and Samaria. Reason? Well, then you've got 2 years before he had died. Sure. But you see, you got to go back now and take Isaiah 7 through 9 along with that. That doesn't mean they're fighting against Judah the whole time, because we know they're not. But it's simply a preparation for battle. It's what they're doing. But they're not actually engaging in a battle that's going to destroy Jerusalem or anything like that, because Ahaz already sent for help. Yes? The spoil, speeds, and the prey hastens. Spoil speeds and the prey hastens. In other words, Assyria is on the march in a hurry.
How do you relate Isaiah 8 and Hebrews 2 together? When it says, behold, I am children from the Lord.
Well, don't you have a cross-reference there? I don't know whether you do or not, but I know it's in... You do? Is it Hebrews 2?
Yeah.
All righty, there you go. You can read it and you'll see how it's related. The passage is quoted over in Hebrews 2. It's what I was mentioning, because I remember it's quoted in Hebrews 2, where he said, behold, I and the children which God had given me. Same thing Isaiah says in Isaiah 8, and I believe that's the 18th verse there in chapter 8. For Praise the Lord. We went longer than we meant to. We are going to take a break, and we're going to start up another class in a few moments. So you're going to have to endure to get through all the teaching here this evening. We're going to do it just like we did with the sermon in Acts. Just take a few minutes, get a drink, but don't go anywhere now, because in just 2 or 3 minutes we're going to start again. We'll start with a few songs with Brother Kerber, and then we'll go back into a new teaching, a new class here this evening. New tape lists are on the back, by the way, if you haven't noticed them already.
For a complete list of Brother Ross